I'm John Messenger. I'm the team leader for working conditions at the International Labor Organization in Geneva. My areas of focus include working time, work organization, and work-life balance. And for the purposes of this particular discussion, my focus is teleworking, which is a form of work organization, not actually a new form of work organization, but a form of work organization which originated in the 1970s in the United States, in fact, in the state of California in the mid-70s, and has evolved over time in generations as I've written in some of my publications, including my book, Telework in the 21st Century, An Evolutionary Perspective. So what I want to talk about now first is I want to give you a broad sense of where I think telework is going, because I think we're in another evolution now. There's been 3 generations I've talked about up till now. And I think that this COVID pandemic really has pushed us into really a new generation of telework. And I will explain what I mean. Now, I think the full impact of COVID on labor markets really remains to be determined. It's very likely, however, the rates of telework are going to stay significantly higher than they were prior to the onset of the pandemic, even after what I call the great pandemic teleworking experiment is over. And that is exactly what it has been for so many of us, and certainly for me. I feel like I'm overseeing an experiment that somehow was designed specifically for my area. It's rather a strange situation, but in any case, we're still in the pandemic. Hopefully we're starting to emerge with vaccinations. Let's hope so. But right now it looks like early stage research and surveys, they found that a high percentage of workers actually have learned during the pandemic they'd like to telework more frequently than they did before the pandemic. And that's even after social distancing restrictions have been lifted. Additionally, some workers have now realized their jobs can be performed outside of traditional office spaces. And so they're now also more comfortable using the necessary technology. Finally, and this is very important, business leaders who previously were resistant to their teams working from home, and this was something my book found was a major barrier to the utilization of telework prior to the pandemic. Resistance by businesses and organizations because they were fearful that if somehow it would result in diminished productivity, this loss of control, direct control over their subordinates. And I think the amazing thing, really, considering nobody had any training, or not many people actually had training in how to telework, much less how to manage teleworkers. It's amazing, frankly, that it worked as well as it did, because we were all kind of thrown in the deep end and it was sink or swim. It's a miracle, really, given the situation, that it wasn't a complete disaster. So it can only be done better, I think, in the future. That was kind of doing it the hard way. But the bottom line is business leaders, many of them who previously were resistant to teams working from home, they're now much more supportive of teleworkers teleworking more frequently because they've seen that they can still be productive when working remotely. However, this requires ensuring that the necessary digital infrastructure is in place. It's a costly but absolutely necessary investment. And that's just key. If you don't have the digital infrastructure, you forget about it. In addition, there's an issue of teleworkability, as I call it, of jobs, whether jobs can be performed via telework. And that's strongly related to occupational structure in particular countries. So it really does vary dramatically how widely telework can be used, although it can be expanded and made feasible and for much higher percentage of workers if the ICT infrastructure is in place and if you have the right occupational skill mix. Now, I think post-pandemic, and this is what everyone seems to be interested in, what's going to happen post-pandemic? What do you foresee looking in your crystal ball? Well, I am no great seer, but I think it's pretty clear now. Post-pandemic, teleworking is likely to return to its voluntary and its partial or occasional nature. Early evidence from pandemic teleworking experiment confirms that this mandatory full-time nature of pandemic teleworking, it exacerbates the disadvantages of this work arrangement. Because it's got pluses and minuses, as I've said in some of the previous studies, like the one I did with the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions in 2000, on 17, working anytime, anywhere, we called it. I mean, this creates or exacerbates or makes things much worse than it would be otherwise. Disadvantages like social isolation, detachment from colleagues in the organization are made much worse by all of the confinement measures, all of the lockdown kind of measures that restrict social interaction, and also ergonomic issues, people having bad furniture. Even this chair I'm sitting on is not the world's finest chair. I only use this chair for webinars, but still, there's all kinds of issues with ergonomics. And existing gender inequalities and challenges for women were particularly aggravated by mandatory full-time teleworking. You can imagine why, given that women have by far the biggest share of unpaid work burdens in care work. They do most of the care work, most of the unpaid domestic tasks. And then all of a sudden now they have to also take care of their kids. They have to maybe homeschool them. They have to, how do you have a full-time job and take care of all the things you have to take care of and homeschool your kids too? I don't know how you even do that. With schools closed, childcare facilities closed. Now that's changing now as schools and childcare facilities reopen, but this was a huge issue throughout the pandemic. And in fact, telework was underdeveloped prior to the pandemic regarding both policy, national and organizational policy, and also regulation, because there was often no laws or regulations of any kind on telework in countries outside the EU, and even fewer on the right to disconnect in order to preserve rest periods for workers. The right to disconnect, I'm sure you've all heard about it. It's just a fancy term meaning a right to rest for teleworkers. A right to disconnect means that you can not have to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You get periods of rest during the working day, between working days, and also over the working week and throughout the working year in the forms of annual leave. So all of these things really say telework was really underdeveloped, both policy-wise, regulation-wise. I would see also in practice. It wasn't widely used. It was considered a perk in many cases, and very few laws on the right to disconnect, particularly outside Europe. So we expect, and this has already been happening during the pandemic, telework policy and law is developing the future to catch up with practice. That's particularly the case in Latin America. Like you have a new law in Mexico, I know, on teleworking, which we actually provided comments on. My colleague, Anaj Gaucher, who's a labor lawyer, provided comments on the draft federal law on telework. We provided comments on many draft laws, and I have to say there are probably more new laws on telework from Chile in the south, Argentina, all the way up to Mexico in the northern part of Latin America than there were anywhere else. The legislation and regulation on telework exploded during the pandemic. So these frameworks are developing to catch up with practice, and they should help to improve working conditions even when mandatory full-time telework is used in other critical situations, because it could be. That's what we're talking about here. Post-pandemic teleworking, that's going to be different, I think, than pandemic teleworking. But it appears to me that it's pretty clear now the hybrid model is being called a blended form of teleworking, which I have for years called partial telework, which involves working part of the time in the office and part of the time remotely. Seems to be the way most companies are going. Most employees seem to prefer it. Most employers seem to prefer it. Of course, this is all anecdotal information. We don't have systematic studies yet, but it certainly seems article after article after article I've read from all over the world seem to be heading the same way, which is toward this hybrid model, part of the time in the office and part of the time remotely. I should mention that seems to also be the way that they're going on the European Parliament. There's a lot of debate in the European Parliament about adopting telework more permanently, and it seems like the hybrid model of 2 or 3 days a week remotely and the rest of the time in the office is going to probably win out there as well. So this is something we're seeing. I'm not saying that it will never have the mandatory full-time form of telework again, but I think it should be used only in exceptional circumstances for epidemics or pandemics, and maybe for natural disasters like it was in Japan following the great Japanese earthquake and tsunami. So really, this is a game changer, I think. The pandemic has been a game changer. It's broken telework's, what's the right word? The ceiling on the adoption of telework has been smashed. You know, it's dramatically increased. I don't think that we will see that same extremely high level post-pandemic, but I do think it's going to be much higher than pre-pandemic. And as a result, a much larger portion of the workforce is going to be using this arrangement, probably on a partial basis, as I said, probably with that so-called hybrid model. And during the next highly uncertain period, workers, employers, and governments, I think, are going to have to adapt to new ways of living and working, and it's going to require new behaviors and new norms. Not just the new normal or the new and better normal, but new norms as well, and new behaviors. This is the future of work, and I'm not the first one to say, in this case, the future of work is now. The future of work has already begun. And the pandemic, I think, is pushing it forward in so many ways. I just mentioned this to you. I'm not going to talk a lot in detail about practice here, but I have a guide, the ILO teleworking guide, teleworking during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond, a practical guide available online in 8 different languages, including Spanish and Portuguese. So I think that covers most of Latin America, as well as English and French and Italian, a bunch of Russian, a bunch of other languages. It's amazing the hunger for this information. We were fortunate that we were well placed to do this, and I had some help from some really good consultants that I've worked with before. And together, I think we put out a good guide. So it's there online. The key focal areas, I call them, in the guide, they affect both the performance of individuals and teams, and also they affect workers' ability to achieve work-life balance and well-being. And those areas are the following: working time and work organization, performance management, digitalization, communication, occupational safety and health, legal and contractual implications, training. That's what we were missing more than anything, the lack of training, and work-life balance too. And I talk about the importance of thinking in new ways, including managing in new ways. You need to give workers the ability to organize their schedules in line with their personal needs. And in return, you demand accountability for results. So that's the deal. Workers get more flexibility in how they organize their schedules, how they organize their work, and employers get hard results. You don't have to worry about whether they're putting in a certain number of, well, maybe you do for record keeping, but you have specific, concrete, measurable criteria as to whether or not your employees are delivering the results that you expect or not. So it's a win-win situation if it's done right. That's the key, to figure out a way to make it a win-win situation, to figure out a way to promote equal treatment and opportunity for both remote workers and on-site workers. One of the things I like about the hybrid model, one of many things, is that it tends to equalize the situation between people working remotely and people working in the office, because you're both. You're basically doing both. You know, so the bottom line is really that I think this is the way forward, and it's really essential in my view that the social partners, they play a central role drawing the lessons that have been learned from the pandemic, teleworking experiment. Because this experiment has a lot to teach us. We need to work together to learn these lessons, to apply them, to revise existing laws, regulations, and policies, or if necessary, develop new ones that can help make teleworking a win-win arrangement that's benefiting both workers and employers in private enterprises as well as public sector organizations. And I think that's certainly possible in parliaments as well. There's no need to give up all of your in-person activities. This is a false choice. I mean, you can decide what specific activities really should be done in person, really need to be done in person, and what specific activities can be done remotely with at least the same level of results, if not greater results. So that I don't have a lot of expertise in the area of parliaments, but I just think a lot of these general lessons apply also in a parliamentary environment. That's true from what I've read about what's going on in Brussels, and particularly with the European Parliament, where there's a lot of debate about whether the Parliament should be virtual or not. And I think they're ending up, I think, with this compromise, with this hybrid model. Part of the time physically present, part of the time working remotely from their home countries. So anyway, that summarizes what I wanted to tell you. I wish you great success with your International Innovation Forum. And it's been a real pleasure to join you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. And also, please check out the guide, Practical Guide on Teleworking I was talking to you about, because it's something I think that would really be beneficial to you. Thank you very much.